Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. In this episode, my friend Behnam, who is a classical violinist and music producer, describes how he learned much about music in his own way. At an early age, Behnam knew clearly that he just liked some sounds and not others, but he didn't understand why. He describes how he then extended his subjective musical sense, which was somewhat unique and atypical, by learning more about musical form and theory and thinking about the ways to assign parts to an orchestra. You wanted to talk about teaching yourself music theory and orchestration.
So yeah, do that. So that kind of goes back to something we were talking about with the example-driven, experimental, like why do I need to know this sort of purpose thing. Well, basically, what happened with trying to teach myself music is and this is something that I think is so interesting because everyone's always like, oh, how do I write my own songs? Or they have that same approach to any other domain of knowledge not any other domain. I would narrow it down to artistic or creative endeavors that are a little bit more subjective.
Yeah.
What I noticed first, and this is just like the thing that started it all, is like I liked some sounds more than others. I would listen to something and I'd be like, I hate that. That just sounds bad.
Yeah.
No idea why. No idea why.
You mean just particular tones or pieces of music, like whole pieces of music?
All of it. Tones, music. Sometimes it would be like half of a melody. I would be like listening to I don't know, some song. I'd be like, the first half of this melody rocks, and I would hear a note and be like, that's dumb. I hate that. This is produced music that everyone listens to. Yeah, like right? CCR, Beatles. I'd be like, this Beatles song is nice.
This is something that's kind of exceptional then, because I bet no one else feels this way. Or at least the majority of the population doesn't.
Well, so I think the majority of the population is waiting for someone else to decide for them which parts should be good and which parts shouldn't be. And to me, it was just like I really didn't care. I was just like I had this visceral reaction. And that's not to say that I had a developed aesthetic. I didn't. Yeah. These were like incipient toddler-esque aesthetic.
Yeah.
Desires.
I see.
Like I'd be like, you know, I would just ride that one note for like 3 minutes if I could. I'd be like, this part sounds great.
Yeah. And then there would be this visceral reaction to like you didn't have any choice about it.
Well, I mean, I didn't think I did. Kid,
okay.
Free will. What is that?
Yeah.
But that's what I think made it easy to write, is because there was some stuff I liked, some stuff I didn't like, and so I was like, I'm just gonna write something that only has the stuff that I like in it.
Yeah.
Like this is straightforward, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what happens there pretty soon is you get bored. Because I liked three things, right? Like, you know, I put them on top of each other, and I'm like, this actually.
Well, I would still be interested to hear that, just to see what you were selecting for.
I've got I don't have so I lost all of my music before 2014 because I got my laptop stolen. The day before I was about to move to San Francisco, and it was in a backpack with my backup drive because I was like living on someone's couch. So I think I have there's some early stuff floating around. I think the earliest stuff I'd be able to scrounge up now is from when I was like 11 or 12. But they mostly, what was interesting is looking back now, I can definitely see where my conceptual shortcomings were. There was, to me, I was kind of uninterested in form, like the structure of a piece. I didn't really care. I was very melody driven.
Yeah.
I think that was exacerbated by the fact that I only played a melodic instrument.
What instrument?
Violin. Right. It's you primarily you're playing one line almost always, unless it's a virtuoso piece. So it's not. I wasn't getting exposed in my practice to harmonies or what it feels like. Say you play piano, to have a melody on top of an ostinato, and great composers, of course, will have those two things work in tandem with each other. So you're getting trained on that specific type of motion that you would emulate in your own compositions if you were a piano player.
But there are a couple of concepts here that I don't understand, so I just want to clarify them first before we move on. When you said that you didn't at first care much for the form, the structure, in my head I was thinking the whole sequence of a song, like a verse, chorus, bridge, kind of. Is that what you're talking about, or something else?
Yeah, that would be a form. Most of my early compositions took form in a theme and variation style. So I'd have the same bass line, which is kind of like having the same 4 chords.
Yeah.
I'd pick a chord progression I liked, and then I would just evolve the melody over that.
Yeah.
And that was it. It didn't really have in that way it was kind of ambling. It didn't have a shape.
I see.
Well formed.
Yeah. So if you let's say chopped it down into little bits, like little sequences, they would all sound pleasant. But if you put them all together, they wouldn't be making one big story with a.
Exactly.
See. Okay. See, I mean, this is just like a layperson's way of trying to understand what you're saying. And when you say that the violin is a melodic instrument, could you unpack that a little bit more? So it's just not naturally built or played in a way that requires this greater structure, or what is that?
So I can maybe make that more clear by contrasting it to other instruments. So you take drums.
Yeah.
That is a rhythmic instrument. If you've got a timpani, if you've got a drum kit, these are all. It's very, very difficult to develop a sense of melody.
Yeah.
With a percussion instrument. That's not to say it's not possible. And then there are like pitch percussion, like marimbas or xylophones, that they are melodic instruments. They're so that's different. So that'd be an example of an instrument that if you played a lot, wouldn't naturally make you tend to think in melodies. And by melodies, I mean the way you would sing something.
Yeah.
Someone's just in the shower.
Yeah.
And then you have something like guitar, which is kind of like a happy medium, because I mean classical guitarists can fill all the different voices in like a piece of Bach or this or that, but it's often strummed, and strummed guitar is very rhythmic. It's chordal as well, so you get harmonies, you get chord progressions that maybe lack, or would tend to lack in a novice hands, much voice leading we can talk about more, and whereas the violin, the idiom of the instrument, the way it's set up, doesn't lend itself towards playing chords, because without rolling the bow, you can only really play 2 notes at a time. And you can sometimes play 3 notes, but the violin is not as inclined to rhythm either, in that the bow is designed for sustained sound. That's why it's as long as it is, right?
Yeah.
And so it can get articulated strokes, and that's something that you have to learn to acquire and master. But it's difficult, and you won't find the same resonance that you would with a sustained sound. Like everything about the violin is designed for that sustained sound.
Yeah.
Or at least the modern violin. So that's sort of what I mean. So it's like all the repertoire that you play as a fiddler is the melody usually. If you go to a violin recital, there's always a pianist.
Yeah.
Because they're playing the harmonies.
Yeah. So I guess we got a little sidetracked there, but we were talking about in your early adventures in creating music, you had this very selective bias towards certain kinds of melody, and then looking back, you said that they lacked form and structure.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was also interesting to see what my influences were. Like I played a lot of video games growing up.
Yeah.
So a lot of that sort of like 8-bit sound you would associate with like Final Fantasy or like the that was what was in my ear. That's what I was drawing from.
I see. So you weren't like doing this, hey, let's make a cool video game kind of. It was just
happening.
It was just happening.
that was my vocabulary. That was all I got exposed to.
See, because these days if you made a YouTube video of playing a violin to reproduce like 8-bit sounds, it would become a thing.
Probably.
But you were not making a thing at that time. It was just the way that...
It was completely unconscious.
Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the early stuff, and then there would be and so that created problems because I would like the first sound, I would like the second sound, and I could hear that they just kind of were disjointed, and I was like, what I don't have are the compositional chops to weave these two ideas together, whether that's to modulate from one key to another, whether that's to lead smoothly just in the voicing so that it doesn't like jump, so there's not like like a splice, you don't hear that, and so this is when I started to kind of hit a wall a little bit, and had to like start digging because I just it was no longer.
Yeah. Wait, how old were you at this time?
So what I'm thinking of is when I was about 13-ish, I was my obsession at the time was to write a violin concerto, and I had this melody that just like I could not get out of my head, but it was like a 2-bar melody, and it just would just roll, and it was I had a pattern underneath it that I knew I would like in the piano, and I had sort of a B theme, and I had like a bit of a sketch and absolutely no technique to expand it, to take those ideas and like one of the most interesting things is to try and take your initial idea, deconstruct it, find its components, and then vary it, rework it, elongate it, play it backwards, retrograde, inverted, this, that. These are all ways to expand on an idea and have it be cohesive and coherent.
Yeah, and make like a full piece of music with
right
variations.
Yeah. And so then I so that year that I dropped out of school is when I started to get more. I think I was spending more of my time because I had more time writing music. Before I finished that violin concerto, I'm trying to remember if this is right, because I had a solid 8 minutes of that piece by fall of that year. So I had made some ground. I was working on it.
Yeah.
Even my sophomore year in high school, I had started to read this book called Schoenberg's Theory of Harmony. Schoenberg was the guy who destroyed classical music for the 20th century.
What do you mean? Like he sat on it?
What happened? He is credited with the invention of atonal music.
It's that fucker.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay. I see.
I mean, music scholars can argue a lot more in depth about who actually is to blame for the degradation of harmony, and who is more just on the bandwagon. But the reason I got his book is because he had every right to come up with his own sense of tonality, because he basically mastered what was conventional harmony. You listen to his early compositions from like the late 1800s, early 1900s. They're gorgeous. They're just comprehensive, like master classes in this is how we do tonal stuff. And so
drops the mic.
Drops the mic.
Yeah.
So he did his own thing, and so he spent most of his life teaching music theory at UCLA. And so that was like his shtick, was to think about this stuff, teach it. And so I got his book. I started reading it. It's an awful read, but so interesting. Because it's translated from German, and I was just super.
What did you say was the name again?
Schoenberg's Theory of Harmony.
Okay.
Yeah, Arnold Schoenberg. However you say it, Schoenberg. So I started to read that, and that piqued my interest. And then I.
So he wrote this in German?
Yeah, it was written initially in German.
So you read translation.
Yeah. Yeah. The way it was pretty clear that it was originally in German is the sentences were prohibitively long sometimes.
Yeah.
They just. And yeah, so then my year off, because I was spending most of my time practicing at Texas Tech University, which is the school in Lubbock, I asked one of the music theory teachers there if I could audit her first year music theory course. So I just sat in the back, 15-year-old shit, take notes, leave. Didn't do the homework, which is great. And so that was really interesting because by that point, I was. Is this the year that I did that? No, it's not. At that point, I basically developed in my mind a conception of how music worked harmonically, melodically. I had these ideas that had really not been populated by anything. What's it when you like give it sort of certified? Or in the canonical music theory. So in my mind, just to give you an example for the music nerds out there, like to me, everything seemed to revolve around this sense of the leading tone or the half step. So when you like have a cadence. I wish I had a piano. Damn.
Do you have anything else? Yeah. Okay. Also, I mean, do you have a guitar around?
I do, but I have to go violin. To listeners, my fourth finger is currently fractured.
I'm responsible to some extent for that. So Behnam and I went on Thursday evening to this social bike ride, and no sooner had we left for our adventure, just down the street, I take this turn, and Behnam is supposed to be behind me, but I hear this loud noise, and I turn back, and Behnam is sprawled on this, just in the middle of the street, and he sits up, and well, anyway, we later find out that his finger is fractured, so his hand is in a cast right now. Not a full cast. I think it's just got a stint in there.
Sorry, I just have to wash my hands.
Yeah, and so, oh, you took it off?
Yeah, I mean it's just
okay.
The splint is just there to keep me from moving.
Yeah,
so I just won't move it.
So he's going to try his best to play the violin.
So leading tone.
Yeah.
So if I hear like I know they're like they're leaning into each other. They're going in a specific way. And to my ear, what seemed to be the most integral component of that was this half step relationship between those two notes.
Which two? As well, you need to give me context.
Yeah. So if I hear. So to me, it felt like they were like there was like this gravity, this force pulling them together. And so if I wanted to exploit that, I could by doing something like. So you hear those like we just went somewhere completely different. The reason that's okay is because it was using that same idea on the lower note. So instead, before we had this where the lowest most note jumped, it leaped from. But in my mind, I was like, well, there's this weird thing going on over here. So that probably applies anytime you've got a note. It could be tugged up. It could be tugged down, sort of.
You're now talking almost like a synesthete, and you're losing me.
Okay. if I'm losing you, then I've lost you, and we're done. And we can hop back.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these were ideas in my mind that I was like, okay. And then I was sitting down to class, and I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, what are these things? Like, it felt so arbitrary to me, and not to be related that much to the type of music that I was used to listening to and hearing. And especially if you begin where they begin at, like, most music schools, the type of harmony they teach is not related to 90% of what you're going to hear, either on the radio or even in classical music. Yeah. Because it's very early, it's rudimentary, and it almost is irrelevant in terms of what is taught today, or what is practiced today.
So when it comes to these things, like, there are already multiple things here. One is the perfect pitch. The second is you said that there were certain melodies that you just liked when you were younger, and other ones that you got this visceral negative reaction. And the third that we're talking about now is this your own unique conception of really the theory of music, or how music works. And so far in this conversation, it feels like you had somewhat of a unique vantage point when it comes to all three of these. Maybe not the only person, but certainly a minority. And so my question is this: if it is just a variant on, if it's just a different allele, so to speak, of the perception and appreciation of music, and let's say there's a majority way of perceiving all three of these aspects, and there's a minority way, which was yours, and there may be multiple such variants, then that would be a different thing, because I mean, if they're all just subjectively equivalent as far as the listener is concerned, and it just depends on how it is that you listen to a certain thing, then that would be one thing. But it seems like not only did you perceive these different dimensions of music differently, but that somehow it was better or more, in the sense that using this perspective, you could create music that not only would it sound good to you, it translates, it sounds good to other people as well. So in a certain sense, these sensitivities that you have appear to me to be a superset of, or to be encompassing, but having some extra features in there.
I would maybe. Okay, that's interesting. So this harkens back to an early gripe I had about formal music theory.
I mean, just to really simplify it, all I'm saying is this just a weirdness, or is this a superpower?
I would say it's a weirdness that stems from, I think, a way I do things, that I had the luxury of doing them that way, being homeschooled, and so I maybe took it a little much farther than someone else who would have the same alleles as me might, which is a very process oriented generative style of play and creation. To give you an example, playing Legos. Growing up, I could play with Legos for hours, and what I would do is I wouldn't even finish a thing, because halfway through I would no longer like what I was doing because I had another idea. And so to me, my whole process of playing with Legos was this sort of cycle. This it had no definite end.
You were like, in Hinduism, the different forms that create, nourish and destroy are all the are three different avatars of the same one God. You're like this. I'll create and then I destroy and I create again. And my all that remains is a cycle, but nothing goes anywhere.
Well, and so my mom was always like, she would always try and snag a picture of whatever I had just made before I would break it, and I would always nothing, even if I was really happy with it and I felt like I'd arrived. I remember one time I tried to make a Lego Balrog from the
a what?
Balrog. It's one of the beasts from Lord of the Rings. Sorry, okay. I'm nerding myself. Yeah. And I was really excited with that. I kept it for maybe an hour because then I needed the parts for something else. I was and similar with actually writing music is most of what I wrote was honestly just transcriptions of improvisations, because I really, really, really hated practicing, and so instead I would just make up my own stuff. My mom would sometimes sneak into the room and put we had a cassette tape recorder, and she would just play that, and then I would get furious because to me this was me time, and I was this is a very intimate thing, where I was not deliberately sounding bad, but reprioritizing sounding good.
Underneath, giving yourself the license to
fuck up,
just explore, and
the first piece I actually finished was and got performed not by me was in that gap year, when I was 15 years old, and a large chunk of that piece is verbatim transcription of a improvisation.
So you wrote this down, and who performed it?
So that at that time, my current violin teacher performed it on one of her recitals.
Okay.
So it was really cool.
And where was this performance?
It was at Texas Tech.
Texas Tech?
Yeah.
Like, so in front of students?
Yeah, in front of students, faculty. I mean, it was her faculty recital. They're required to give one. Sort of, it's the way like normal professors are required to put out research papers.
Yeah, I see. Okay. And so you were the first author of this research paper.
Basically, yeah. I basically got to sneak in as like also.
Yeah. How did it feel when she was? Were you there?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah.
It was so much better than performing because like it's like, oh man, like no comparison. Because first of all, it's like your shit. Like
yeah.
Like you're actually like people are hearing something that you have to say, and there's not the stress of performing. I was just like sitting there, and like someone way better musician than I was on stage playing it. So I'm like, we're in good hands. I'm just gonna chill out. It was also really fun to go through the process of showing someone the music, not just in terms of do you like it, but getting a sense for how notation affects the way a musician will respond to it, and how you're using a language between languages, right? When you're writing down the music, because you're trying to point at the thing in your head, and that was another big beef I had with how classical music is scored. Is I was like, there is nothing to write down what's in my head. Like I would have a rhythm in my mind that was not strictly eighth notes, not strictly quarter notes, but somewhere in between had some,
Oh, that's odd.
I mean, like it's like swung rhythm in jazz. Like so many rhythms in jazz are, they're like repeatable and like they're not random, but they're very difficult to notate. They have like a quote unquote groove to it, right?
Yeah.
So in my mind, there were these things that like it was a rhythm that to me felt normal, natural, and distinct. And I was like, I'd be looking at the page, and it's like I had the two versions, and I would play them back on the awful finale MIDI file, and I'm like, neither of these are what I'm looking for, and I have no idea how to write that.
Yeah, I see. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and totally not a problem with like producing music now. That's something I really enjoy.
You know what? So we started this conversation talking about perfect pitch, and at that time I was thinking it's just one little quirky thing that you have that's different from the wild type allele, to use genetic terminology. But it seems like it's something more fundamental that may be the hub of a wheel, and so some switch, maybe not like a cluster of genetic switches that are just set to different values for you, and so that in downstream produces a bunch of different effects.
It's possible. I mean, it's difficult to say how much. I mean, that's a larger debate, right? Of how much is nature versus nurture, and I mean, I'm comfortable saying that I think a lot of, because so many things did show up early, just too early for them to be the result of like a specific type of like lifestyle or a specific like regimen. It just that would be a less plausible hypothesis than it's just the fact that there's some differences. Yeah.
No, I'm not so much talking about nature versus nurture. In that sense, I'm not really talking so much about whether this is genetic or due to upbringing of some sort. I'm more interested in noting, I guess, the fact that it's not just a bunch of distinct, isolated things that all have to do with sound and their perception. It's probably rational to think that it comes down to some one or a couple of root causes that are set to different values, which have downstream effects that are all very distinct, that you could note different, like, oh hey, number one, there's this perfect pitch. Number two, there's this, this way of thinking of music that is hard to write down. And number three, I have this particular selection bias for certain kinds of melodies. By the way, coming to which, do you still have this bias? Like when you listen to music, those pieces of music, do you still feel like, oh shit, that I don't like that? That's
so no, it's evolved a lot. I think when I started to get more serious about music, I changed the way I listened, in that I deliberately went out of my way to begin and force myself to understand music I didn't like and understand why I didn't like it. So this, for some reason, followed a pretty linear progression through the history of classical music. I started out really loving Baroque music, like 1650 to 1750. Couldn't get enough of Vivaldi. I thought Vivaldi was just like the jam. And then I got more into like classical music, like early Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Mozart. I guess those are almost borderline romantic. But then I got into like really romantic music, and this happened just with like an odd sequentiality in terms of my progression following the progression of classical music.
Yeah.
Until like by my senior year in high school, I was playing Bartók's Second Violin Concerto for my college auditions, and this piece is like it was written in like 1936, by a composer, Bela Bartók, who was Hungarian, and had just like one of the most, I think, diverse, rich. It's so weird because the thing I love Bartók. I geek out on him. I put him up there with like Beethoven and Bach in terms of his mastery of the craft, because I feel like what he was able to do is he took all of the vocabularies in music, right, in Western classical music up into that time, whether that's like French Impressionism or like sort of like more normal Wagnerianism, but also like stuff that like Stravinsky was doing, and a bit of atonality that Schoenberg, this guy, was doing. He took all of that and used that just as a language to say something. And at the time, I was so caught up on the language, I was hearing some bits of Schoenberg, and I'm like, God, who's this Bartók guy? It's so harsh. It's so like, ugh. And it took a while for me and actually basically I didn't ever really love a composer until I played something that they wrote, because that forces you to become so intimate with it that you lose that sense of sort of like your appreciation of it's different. It's qualitatively different because you're not appreciating it as a listener, you're appreciating it as a player. And then there are all these extra considerations that come into play. The way one, I would imagine, like would admire a sports car differently if you were a professional race car driver.
True. Yeah. Or if you ever drove one, which a single tear falls down my cheek. I mean, I really like cars, man. But I don't own one, and yeah. Well, Austin went through a gas crisis, but okay, big segue. Let's forget that. Yeah. I think I had another question about the music thing, but I can't remember. So,
we can kill the music thing. I'm happy with that.
You said you taught yourself music theory, and we heard about that, and orchestration. Was there something else that you wanted to talk about, the orchestration part?
Just that was really interesting because there are like pretty well-known books, treatises on orchestration. So I just bought some of those, read them. Yeah. You buy some scores. You just basically do what the other people are doing. So
orchestration is like deciding who plays what in an orchestra from something that you've composed.
Yeah, and so and this is what was really interesting is when I started writing for orchestra, I was doing it for my concerto, and I also just decided to start writing for orchestra. And so I was not one of those people who would go from a smaller arrangement to orchestration. I went straight to orchestration. And I think this is partly because this goes back to the difference, I think, between like pianist and non-pianist composers. Pianists have basically the whole harmonic palette at their disposal when they play. They a piano solo sounds rich, it sounds full. Because it has your melody, it has your harmony, it has a bass line, it has the whole vocal range and then more. Whereas the violins, that's as low as you go. You're never going to get that bass. And so for them, they can conceive of music in this scope, and then taking whatever it is written on the piano, to them is sort of like, it's like giving it texture, right, to something that already has bones. But to me it was different because I didn't have that body of knowledge of what it felt like to play a fully fledged piece of music. So I was never thinking in terms of like, this is something I always like irked me when I noticed it in certain composers' styles, is that it literally just looked like they had taken the left hand part and given it to the cellos. And I was like, the left hand of a piano does not work the same way a cellist works on the fingerboard. And so that became something that I was really attuned to was what they call idiomatic or non-idiomatic writing. Basically, does it feel good? Does it fall? Does it make sense on the instrument?
So which one's better, idiomatic or non-idiomatic?
Always idiomatic.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I just don't know the definition. So,
yeah. Well, to me, idiomatic just means it has an ease of play. It's like feels native. It's like the difference between.
I guess I can see where that usage of the name idiomatic came from. Just this intuitive. Way of
and so to me it was like, and I would just see this all the time in certain composers' works, is that it was like I was missing a finger, because pianists have 5 fingers on each hand, and the violinist doesn't use their thumb, and there would always just be like one extra note somewhere in the middle of the melody that makes it really awkward on the violin, that it just wouldn't even be an issue, because they were probably sitting at a piano when they were there. And to me that kind of lack of consideration for what ultimately does affect the quality of the performance, because an orchestra is an instrument like any other, right? It's like, if you're going to play the piano with your fists, it's not going to go well. And same way, if you expect a like a bassoon to achieve the same sort of, a good bassoon is good. Well, this is the thing, like all musicians have to deal with the fact that most music comes out of a pianist's head. And so that's where technique goes, is towards, I think I would argue, towards those things that are actually quite easy on the piano, whether it's playing scales, arpeggios, this, that, and trying to emulate with some high fidelity something similar on their own instrument. But to me, there was an unexplored area of like what feels good on a violin, or what feels good on a cello, what feels good on a horn, or this or that. That to me was really interesting, because understanding like how a person is going to physically feel, and how their brain is going to feel in trying to make this music changes their relationship to it, and that changes what comes out. So it just felt underexplored to me. It was like they were stuck in the middle language, because the modern notation is great for piano, because it has discrete keys, discrete pedals, and all of that works really well.
It's like pianists have hijacked whole like music theory, orchestration.
I mean, I would argue that, but that's just because I'm a butthurt violinist who have always wanted to be a pianist.
Okay. Do you know the thing that went off on my phone?
What was that?
It was my... I want to ration 10 minutes of Facebook time to myself every day and not be on Facebook the rest of the time.
Oh, nice.
So, but I don't know if it's going to work. So that's my alarm. In about 5 minutes, another one is going to go off. It says, okay.
Oh, this is your time.
But I'm not going to be on Facebook now. Okay. I'm just saying that's what the alarm was for. It's just daily allotted. I'm like, Behnam, this is my Facebook time. So you and your music can fuck off while I scroll through people's pictures that I hate. Okay.
Thanks for visiting us in the Room of Lives. In the next episode, Behnam shares his experiences and thoughts on shame, vulnerability, and creative flow.
on that